The convoy pulls into the country club parking lot like a declaration of war. 3 black SUVs, windows tinted so dark they swallow the afternoon light, tires crunching over pristine gravel with the kind of precision that makes people stop and stare. The wedding reception is in full swing behind those French doors, all champagne flutes and string lights and laughter that sounds expensive. But out here by the fountain, Hazel Carter stands alone in a lavender bridesmaid dress that was designed to break her spirit, mascara tracking down her brown cheeks like evidence of a crime she didn't commit. The SUVs stop in perfect formation. Doors open in unison, and Kang Ji-ho steps out wearing a black suit that probably costs more than the wedding itself, his expression carved from something cold and unforgiving. Behind him, 4 men in dark suits fan out with the kind of quiet professionalism that screams private security, the kind of men whose presence changes the air pressure in a room. Ji-ho doesn't look at them, doesn't look at the growing crowd of wedding guests spilling out onto the terrace to see what's happening. He looks only at Hazel, and when he reaches her, his hand cups her face with a gentleness that contradicts everything else about this moment. Which one of them is your mother? His voice is soft, meant only for her, but there's something lethal underneath it. Hazel's breath hitches. She nods toward the French doors, toward the reception hall where her family is probably still laughing, still celebrating, still pretending she doesn't exist. Stay here, Ji-ho says, and turns. He walks toward the entrance with the kind of certainty that parts crowds, and the wedding guests freeze with champagne glasses halfway to their lips, conversations dying mid-sentence. The music inside seems to dim, or maybe that's just how it feels when someone walks into a room carrying that much controlled fury. Ji-ho stops in the doorway, and his voice cuts through the reception like a blade. I'm looking for Diane Carter. The crowd parts because people always part for men who speak like that, and there she is, Diane Carter, 54 years old and polished like a weapon, wearing a mother-of-the-bride dress that cost a small fortune and an expression that's turning from confusion to indignation in real time. Excuse me, who are you to... She starts. I'm the man who's going to tell you exactly what kind of mother you've been for the last 26 years, Ji-ho says, and the words land like a slap. Let me tell you exactly how we got here. Can I ask where you are watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where this story is reaching. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because this is about to get intense. 8 months earlier, the kitchen at Belle Fleur was a controlled war zone, all flames and shouting chefs and the percussion of knives on cutting boards, creating a rhythm that would drive most people insane. But Hazel Carter moved through it like she was conducting a symphony, 26 years old and commanding her pastry station with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she was exceptional at what she did. Her chef's whites were spotless despite the chaos. Her hair pulled back tight, and when a junior pastry cook presented a tray of petit fours that weren't perfect, she didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. This ganache broke, Hazel said, pressing gently on one of the desserts. Start over. Presentation is in 15 minutes. Chef, we don't have time, the junior cook started. Then work faster. I don't send out broken food. The cook hurried away, and Hazel was already moving to the next task, checking temperatures, adjusting plating, tasting a sauce, and correcting it without hesitation. She didn't know she was being watched, didn't notice the man standing in the kitchen doorway with his suit jacket unbuttoned and his tie slightly loosened, observing her the way art collectors observe paintings they're about to buy. Kang Ji-ho owned Belle Fleur, owned 3 other restaurants in Manhattan, owned enough real estate that he didn't need to stand in his own kitchens watching service, but he did it anyway because details mattered. And Hazel Carter was a detail that had caught his attention 6 months ago, and hadn't let go since. The way she moved with absolute certainty, the way she commanded respect without demanding it, the way she tasted food like it mattered, like she understood something fundamental about pleasure and discipline that most people never figured out. Service ended. The kitchen staff began breakdown, the frenetic energy shifting into exhaustion, and Hazel was wiping down her station when Ji-ho finally approached. She looked up, startled, and he watched her body language shift the moment she recognized him. The owner, the boss, the man who could fire her with a word. "You run your station like a conductor," Ji-ho said. "Mr. Kang." Hazel straightened, professional mask sliding into place. "I didn't realize you were observing tonight." "I observe every night. You're Hazel Carter. You've been here 6 months." "Yes, sir." "Stay for dinner. The kitchen's closed, but I'd like you to try the new tasting menu." Hazel hesitated, and Ji-ho saw something flicker across her face. Anxiety, maybe, or fear. Something that made her glance at the clock like it was a countdown timer. "I appreciate the offer, but I really need to get home." "Another time, then." Ji-ho kept his voice neutral, but he was cataloging every micro-expression, every tiny tell. "But I'd like to request you personally for a private event next month. I'll triple your usual catering rate." Hazel blinked, surprise breaking through that professional mask. "That's very generous." "You're very talented," Ji-ho said, and held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary before walking away. He heard her exhale behind him, heard the quick shuffle of her packing up and rushing out, and he wondered what she was running from, or who. Ji-ho didn't believe in coincidences, which is why he started creating them. The next private event, Hazel catered a dinner for his business associates, and he watched her work with the same focused intensity he brought to negotiations worth millions. She moved through his penthouse like she belonged there, plating courses with hands that never trembled even when he asked her opinion on wine pairings, even when his associates complimented her work and she had to accept praise like it didn't make her uncomfortable. She was professional, guarded, but Ji-ho saw the way her shoulders relaxed slightly when she talked about food, saw the passion that lived underneath all that careful control. The week after that, he stopped by the kitchen during her shift with a coffee made exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, oat milk, extra hot, because he'd asked the staff and they'd told him without question. Hazel stared at the cup like it might explode. "How did you know?" she asked. "I pay attention," Ji-ho said simply, and left before she could overthink it. He invited her to a gallery opening and she declined, voice apologetic but firm. "I don't really do events," she said, and Ji-ho didn't push, just filed away another piece of information about this woman who was brilliant and confident in her kitchen, but seemed to shrink everywhere else. He'd built an empire on reading people, on understanding what they wanted before they said it, and what Hazel wanted was safety, except she didn't seem to believe she deserved it. After another catering job, Ji-ho found her alone in his kitchen, meticulously cleaning up even though his staff would handle it. She looked exhausted, beautiful in that bone-deep way that had nothing to do with makeup or styling, and Ji-ho decided he was done being patient. "Hazel, I'd like to take you to dinner," he said, "not as your employer, as someone who would very much like to know you better." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was searching for a trap, for the catch, for the moment this would turn into something that hurt. Whatever she found in his expression must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Okay. Yes." The bistro in Tribeca was intimate, all candlelight and quiet corners, the kind of place where conversations could happen without the world pressing in. They sat across from each other, and Ji-ho watched Hazel scan the menu with practiced efficiency before pointing to the smallest entree, the one that probably wouldn't satisfy anyone who'd worked a 12-hour shift. "You don't have to do that," Ji-ho said. Hazel looked up, confused. "Do what?" "Order what you think you should instead of what you want." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, defensiveness, then something softer and more vulnerable. "How did you—" "Because I've watched you create food for months. You understand flavor, indulgence, pleasure, but you never let yourself enjoy it." Ji-ho leaned forward slightly. "Why is that?" Hazel's fingers tightened around her menu. For a long moment she didn't speak, and Ji-ho waited because he was good at waiting when it mattered. Finally, she said, "My mother used to say I didn't need to enjoy food, that I'd already enjoyed enough. The words hung in the air between them, and Jiho felt something cold settle in his chest. Your mother was wrong. She's been saying things like that my whole life. Hazel's voice was quiet now, barely above a whisper. I'm the biggest of 3 daughters, literally. My sisters, Simone and Maya, they're smaller, prettier, more acceptable. I put myself through culinary school working 3 jobs. I send money home when they ask, and it's never enough. I'm never enough. Jiho reached across the table, covered her hand with his. Hazel, look at me. She did. Eyes bright with unshed tears. You are extraordinary. Your family's failure to see that is their blindness, not your inadequacy. Do you understand me? Hazel's breath caught, and something in her expression cracked open, like she'd been waiting her entire life for someone to say exactly that, and had stopped believing it would ever happen. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she laughed, watery and surprised. Now, Jiho said, thumb brushing across her knuckles. Order the duck confit, and we're getting the chocolate souffle after because you deserve to enjoy something you didn't make yourself. She laughed again, real and genuine this time, and ordered the duck. And when the souffle came, Jiho watched her close her eyes at the first bite, watched her let herself feel pleasure without guilt, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to keep that expression on her face. The weeks that followed felt like learning a new language, one made of small moments and careful trust. Hazel taught Jiho to temper chocolate in his penthouse kitchen, laughing when he messed it up 3 times in a row. They had coffee on his balcony overlooking the city, Hazel wearing one of his shirts because she'd stayed over and didn't want to do the walk of shame in her chef's whites. Jiho wrapped his arms around her from behind and felt her lean into him, felt the way she was slowly letting him carry some of the weight she'd been holding alone. They were having breakfast when Hazel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and Jiho watched her entire body language change, shoulders tensing, jaw tightening, something shuddering behind her eyes. What is it? He asked. My sister Simone is getting married. Hazel's voice was carefully neutral. My mom wants me to make the wedding cake. For free, I'm guessing. Hazel nodded, still staring at her phone. She says it would mean a lot to the family, that it's the least I could do. Jiho set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. You don't have to say yes. I know. But Hazel's expression said something different, said that she'd been saying yes to her family's demands her entire life because maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they'd finally see her worth. But maybe if I do this, if I show them I can be part of the family. Hazel? Jiho's voice was gentle but firm. Making that cake won't change how they see you. You know that, don't you? She looked at him then, eyes bright with something that might have been hope or desperation or both. I have to try. Jiho didn't argue, but his expression said he knew exactly how this would end. He'd built a career on reading situations, on knowing when negotiations were doomed before they started, and everything about Hazel's family screamed toxicity. But he also knew she had to see it for herself, had to reach her own breaking point. So he just pulled her into his arms and said, "Then I'll be there with you, whatever happens." 3 days before the wedding, Hazel took over Jiho's industrial kitchen, the one he kept for private events and late-night experiments. She worked with the intensity of someone trying to prove something, creating a 4-tier masterpiece with raspberry and lemon curd filling, and delicate fondant flowers, and ivory fondant roses that looked like they might bloom at any moment. Jiho brought her tea, watched her work with hands that never trembled even when she was running on 4 hours of sleep and pure determination. It's beautiful, he said, because it was. Perfect in a way that would never be enough for people who were determined not to see her. It has to be perfect, Hazel replied, adjusting a rose that was already flawless. It already is, but that won't matter to them, will it? Hazel didn't answer, just kept working, and Jiho made a decision. He'd go to this wedding, would watch Hazel's family with the same attention he brought to reading contracts, and if they hurt her the way he suspected they would, he'd make sure it was the last time. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like mockery, all blue skies and gentle sunshine streaming through the windows of the country club where Simone Carter was getting married. Hazel delivered the cake herself at 7 in the morning, maneuvering the 4-tier masterpiece through the service entrance with the help of 2 of Jiho's staff members because he'd insisted she not do it alone, had insisted on a lot of things that made Hazel feel cared for in ways she wasn't used to. The cake looked even more stunning in the venue's light, gold leaf catching the sun, fondant roses so delicate they could have been real. Diane Carter was already there, supervising the setup with the kind of militant precision she brought to everything, wearing a coral dress that probably cost more than Hazel's monthly rent. She circled the cake slowly, eyes narrowed, and Hazel felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety, waiting for the criticism, for the moment when nothing she did would be good enough. The gold leaf is a bit much. It cheapens the look, don't you think? Diane said finally, voice carrying that particular tone that sounded like a question but was really a judgment. Hazel's jaw tightened. Simone requested gold accents in her original vision board. Did she? Diane's tone suggested she didn't believe it or didn't care. Well, I suppose it's too late to change it now. Simone appeared then, 24, and glowing in that effortless way that had always come so easily to her, flanked by Maya and 3 other bridesmaids who all looked like they'd stepped out of the same boutique catalog. She glanced at the cake with the kind of casual disinterest people reserved for things they'd never had to work for. "It's fine, Mom," Simone said, waving a manicured hand. "Nobody really cares about the cake anyway. It's just for photos." Just for photos. 3 days of work, hands cramping from piping detail, staying up until 2 in the morning to get the fondant perfectly smooth, just for photos. Hazel felt something cold settle in her chest, but she smiled because that's what she did, had been doing her entire life. "I'm glad you like it." "Did you bring your dress?" Maya asked, and there was something in her voice that made Hazel's instincts prickle with warning. "I'll change at the hotel," Hazel said. "Actually, we need you to change here," Diane interjected. "Photos start in 2 hours, and I won't have you being late because you're fussing with your appearance." The bridesmaid dress was waiting in the bridal suite, hanging with all the others, except it was immediately obvious that something was wrong. The other dresses were properly sized, tailored to fit the women who'd be wearing them. Hazel's was lavender tulle and at least 2 sizes too small. The kind of small that wasn't an accident, that was a choice. Maya handed it to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Simone picked them out months ago. You haven't gained weight, have you?" The question hung in the air like a weapon. Hazel took the dress, fabric scratching against her palms, and felt that old familiar shame trying to crawl up her throat. "This doesn't fit." "Well, make it work," Diane said from across the room, not even looking up from her phone. "The photos are in an hour and a half. We don't have time for your usual drama." Hazel went into the bathroom and stared at the dress, at her reflection, at the evidence that her mother and sisters had known exactly what they were doing when they ordered this. She tried to put it on, struggled with the zipper that wouldn't close, felt the fabric dig into her ribs and hips, and every soft place her mother had spent 26 years telling her was wrong. The dress was designed to humiliate, and it was working. When she emerged, the other bridesmaids were photo-ready, perfect in their perfectly fitted dresses, and Hazel looked like she was being strangled by lavender tulle. No one said anything directly, but she caught the glances, the barely concealed smirks, the way Maya whispered something to another bridesmaid that made them both laugh. Jiho was already at the venue, seated toward the back of the ceremony space because Hazel hadn't been allowed to put him at a family table, hadn't been allowed to do anything that might suggest she had a life outside of serving them. He saw her the moment she walked down the aisle with the other bridesmaids, saw the dress that didn't fit and the expression on her face that was trying so hard to look composed, and something dark and furious flickered across his features. He'd promised himself he'd stay calm, would be supportive, would let Hazel handle her family her way. But looking at her now, seeing the physical evidence of their cruelty, he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. The ceremony was beautiful in that generic, wealthy wedding way, all white roses and string quartet and vows that sounded like they'd been pulled from a Pinterest board. Hazel stood at the altar with the other bridesmaids, trying to breathe in a dress that felt like punishment, watching her sister marry a man she'd known for 8 months, while their parents beamed like this was the greatest achievement imaginable. No one looked at Hazel. No one acknowledged her. She was a prop in the background of someone else's perfect day. The reception was worse. Hazel found her assigned seat at a table in the far back corner, tucked away with second cousins she hadn't seen in 10 years, and a family friend who kept asking if she was sure she was related to the bride because she looked so different from the rest of the family. Not at the family table where her parents sat with Simone and Maya and Simone's new in-laws. Not even at a table within sight of the head table. Just tucked away like something embarrassing, something they wanted present, but not visible. A wedding guest approached her table, a woman in her 50s wearing much perfume and a condescending smile. "Excuse me, can you bring more champagne to table 6? We've been waiting forever." Hazel looked up, confused. "I'm not..." But the woman had already walked away, hadn't even waited for a response, because she'd looked at Hazel and seen staff, seen someone whose job was to serve. Hazel sat frozen, the words stuck in her throat, feeling worse than imaginable in this uncomfortable dress. The dinner service happened, courses arriving with the kind of precision Hazel would have appreciated if she wasn't struggling to eat anything in a dress that made breathing difficult. Her family laughed at the head table, toasted each other, performed their happiness for an audience that included several local business owners and social media influencers who were documenting every moment. Hazel's cake was wheeled out to enthusiastic applause, photographed from every angle, and no one mentioned who made it. No one looked at her table. Then came the speeches. The best man told stories about the groom that were probably exaggerated but entertaining. And then Maya stood up, champagne glass in hand and that same smile that had been cutting Hazel down their entire lives. "I want to say a few words about my sister Simone," Maya began, and launched into a glowing speech about their childhood, about how Simone had always been the golden child, about family traditions, and inside jokes and memories that painted a picture of a perfect sisterhood. She mentioned their parents, mentioned even the family dog, mentioned a vacation they'd taken when Simone was 12. She talked for 5 minutes about love and family and connection. She did not mention Hazel once. Not her name, not her existence, nothing to suggest that there was a third Carter daughter sitting in the back of the room in a dress that didn't fit, listening to herself be erased from the family narrative in real time. When Maya finished, everyone applauded, and Hazel sat there with a smile frozen on her face, something breaking inside her chest that she wasn't sure she could put back together. The photographer called for family photos after dinner, that golden hour light filtering through the French doors, making everything look like a fairy tale that Hazel had never been part of. She watched from her table as her family gathered near the fountain, Simone in her white dress looking radiant, Maya and their parents arranging themselves in formations that had probably been planned weeks in advance. Hazel stood slowly, smoothing down the lavender dress that was cutting into her ribs, and started walking toward them because she was family. She was immediate family. She deserved to be in these photos, even if every instinct screamed that she wasn't wanted. She made it halfway across the terrace before Diane's voice cut through the evening air, sharp and dismissive in a way that could have been mistaken for practical if you didn't know better. "Hazel, just immediate family for this set." Hazel stopped walking. "I am immediate family. You know what I mean." Diane's smile didn't waver, that practiced social smile she used when she was being cruel in public and needed it to look reasonable. "The proportions will look better with just the 5 of us. We'll do extended family photos later." The proportions. Like Hazel was a composition problem, a visual imbalance that needed to be edited out. Simone wouldn't meet her eyes, was studying her bouquet with sudden intense interest. Maya was already posing, hip cocked, completely unbothered by the fact that they were excluding their sister from family photos at a family wedding, and their father, Richard Carter, who'd been essentially silent Hazel's entire life, just stood there with his hands in his pockets like this wasn't his problem to solve. "Right," Hazel said, voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "Extended family, got it." She turned and walked away before anyone could see her face crack, before the tears could start, before she gave them the satisfaction of knowing they'd landed another blow. She made it to the hallway leading to the parking lot, that dim corridor where the wedding's perfect facade couldn't quite reach, and leaned against the wall trying to remember how to breathe. The dress was suffocating her, or maybe that was just panic, or maybe it was 26 years of this exact feeling, being too much and not enough simultaneously, being present but invisible, being family in name only. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, scrolled to Jiho's number, and pressed call before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "Hazel? Can you come get me?" Her voice broke on the words, all that careful composure shattering. I can't do this anymore." "Where are you, Hazel, baby?" Jiho was already moving. She could hear it in his voice, that shift from observing to acting. "The hallway by the west entrance. The wedding is... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the specific cruelty of being excluded from family photos at your own sister's wedding, of being treated like a problem that needed managing rather than a person who deserved love. "I'm coming right now. Don't move." The call ended. Hazel slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, expensive lavender tulle pooling around her like a punishment. Mascara running freely now because what was the point of holding it together anymore? She could hear the reception continuing without her, music and laughter and the sound of people celebrating a love that her family believed in for Simone, but had never believed possible for Hazel. She'd made their cake, had poured 3 days of her life into creating something beautiful for them, and they couldn't even let her stand in a photograph. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard footsteps, heels clicking against tile with that distinctive angry rhythm that meant someone was coming to handle a situation. Diane appeared at the end of the hallway, still wearing that social smile but with an edge underneath it now, irritation bleeding through the practiced facade. "Hazel, what are you doing? People are asking where you went." "I'm sure they're not," Hazel said, not bothering to stand. Diane's smile tightened. "Don't be dramatic. Get up. We need to talk." "I don't want to talk right now, Mom." "Well, that's unfortunate because we're talking anyway." Diane crossed her arms, and there it was. That look Hazel had been seeing her entire life, that expression that said she was a disappointment before she'd even opened her mouth. "You need to be out of the guest house by the end of next month." The words hit like a physical blow. Hazel's head snapped up. "What? It's time. Your sisters both moved out by 25. You're 26 now. It's time to stand on your own feet." Diane said it like it was reasonable, like Hazel hadn't been standing on her own feet since she was 18 years old, putting herself through culinary school while her sisters got their education paid for in full. "I've been standing on my own feet my entire life," Hazel said, voice shaking. "I worked 3 jobs to pay for school. I worked 70-hour weeks. I sent you $2,000 last month when you said you needed help with property taxes. And yet you're still living in our guest house? Still struggling." Diane's voice had that practiced disappointed tone that suggested this was somehow Hazel's moral failing. Maybe if you focus less on work and more on finding a respectable partner, on presenting yourself in a way that... "I have someone." The words came out sharper than intended. Diane's eyebrows rose. "That Korean man, Hazel, be realistic. Men like that don't..." She paused, recalibrated. "I'm trying to protect you from disappointment. Men with that kind of money and status, they don't settle down with women who look like me." Hazel stood now, lavender dress and all, something crystallizing, in her chest that felt like clarity or maybe just rage. "Say it, Mom. Men like Jiho don't love women who look like me. That's what you mean, isn't it?" "Don't put words in my mouth. I'm saying you need to be realistic about your prospects. You need to lose weight, settle down with someone more appropriate for you, find a career that's more respectable than making desserts. I'm a pastry chef at one of the best restaurants in Manhattan." "You're a cook, Hazel. Let's not pretend it's more than it is." Diane's voice had gone cold now, that false warmth completely stripped away. "I'm trying to help you become someone we can be proud of, someone who fits into this family, but you fight me at every turn. Maybe if you just tried harder, if you made yourself smaller, more agreeable, more like Maya and Simone." Hazel laughed, and it sounded broken even to her own ears. "I've spent my entire life trying to shrink myself to fit into the shape you wanted, and it's never been enough. Nothing I do is ever enough for you. That's not fair. You excluded me from family photos at my sister's wedding. You put me in a dress that doesn't fit. You seated me with strangers. Maya didn't mention me once in her speech. My own father hasn't said 10 words to me all day. And now you're kicking me out of the guest house that Simone lived in for 3 years and Maya lived in for 2 while they figured their lives out. But I get 8 months before you decide I'm not worth the investment." Hazel's voice was rising now, years of swallowed words finally breaking free. "So no, Mom, I don't think I'm being unfair. I think I'm being accurate." Diane's expression hardened. "If you're going to be disrespectful, we're done with this conversation. You have until the end of next month. Figure it out." She turned to leave, then paused. "And fix your face before you come back to the reception. You're embarrassing yourself." She walked away, heels clicking, leaving Hazel standing in that hallway with tears streaming down her face and the weight of 26 years pressing down on her chest like it might suffocate her. She couldn't go back to that reception, couldn't paste on a smile and pretend everything was fine, couldn't watch her family celebrate without her one more second. She made it outside to the parking lot, the evening air finally letting her breathe, and collapsed onto the bench by the fountain. Her phone was still in her hand from calling Jiho, and she stared at it through blurred vision, mascara probably making her look like a nightmare, this terrible lavender dress evidence of everything her family thought about her. The reception continued inside. She could hear the music shift to something upbeat, could hear laughter and celebration, and all the sounds of people who belonged together. She belonged nowhere, had never belonged anywhere, and she was so tired of trying. That's when she heard it, the sound of engines, multiple engines coming, closer. She looked up through tear-blurred vision and saw them, 3 black SUVs pulling into the parking lot with the kind of precision that suggested military training or something equally serious. They stopped in formation, and Hazel's breath caught, because she knew those vehicles, knew what they meant. The doors opened in unison. Jiho stepped out first, and the evening light caught the sharp lines of his suit, the cold fury in his expression that was somehow scarier than if he'd been shouting. Behind him, 4 men in dark suits emerged. His security team, the ones he used for high-stakes business deals and situations that required absolute discretion. Hazel had met them once, briefly, and they'd been polite and professional. They looked different now. They looked like men who'd been told someone needed protecting and had taken that instruction seriously. Jiho walked straight to her, and the moment he reached the bench, his expression shifted, fury bleeding into concern so profound it made Hazel's chest ache. Jiho knelt in front of her, hands cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about his arrival, thumbs brushing away tears that wouldn't stop falling. "Which one of them is your mother?" Hazel couldn't speak, could only nod toward the French doors where the reception was still going strong, where her family was probably still laughing and celebrating and not noticing she was gone. Jiho's jaw tightened, and he stood, turning toward his security team with the kind of quiet authority that made men twice his size snap to attention. "Stay with her," he said to the closest guard, then looked back at Hazel. "I need you to trust me right now, darling. Can you do that?" She nodded, because what else could she do? What else was left? Jiho walked toward the reception hall, and Hazel watched through tear-blurred vision as wedding guests on the terrace noticed him. Conversations faltering, champagne glasses freezing mid-sip. He moved like he owned the space, like he owned the entire world, and maybe, in some ways, he did. The security team followed at a careful distance, visible enough to be a statement, but not so close as to be threatening. Yet. Jiho stopped in the doorway, and his voice cut through the music and laughter like a blade through silk. "I'm looking for Diane Carter." The entire reception seemed to stop. Conversations died. The band faltered. People turned to stare at this man in the expensive suit who just walked into a wedding reception with private security and murder in his eyes. Diane appeared from near the head table, confusion shifting to indignation as she approached. "Excuse me, who are you to interrupt?" "I'm Kang Ji-ho," he said, voice carrying across the terrace with perfect clarity. "And I'm here to tell you exactly what kind of mother you've been to your daughter for the last 26 years. Diane's face flushed. "You have no right." "I have every right, because I love her, and I will not stand by while you destroy her." Jiho's voice was perfectly controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying. "For 26 years, you've told Hazel she wasn't good enough, not thin enough, not successful enough, not worthy of love or respect or basic human dignity. You've taken her money, dismissed her achievements, and excluded her from her own family while demanding she be grateful for the privilege of your cruelty. This is completely inappropriate," Diane started. But Jiho wasn't finished. "You put her in a dress designed to humiliate her. You seated her with strangers at her sister's wedding. You allowed her to be erased from the maid of honor speech. And then," his voice dropped lower, colder, "then you excluded her from family photographs because the proportions would look better without her." The crowd had gone completely silent now. Phones were out, recording. This would be all over social media within the hour, and Jiho knew it, wanted it. Simone had appeared next to Diane, white dress and horror-struck expression, and Maya was frozen near the head table, looking like she wanted to disappear. "Your sister," Jiho said, turning slightly to address Simone directly, "spent 3 days making your wedding cake, 3 days of precise, meticulous work to create something perfect for you, and you didn't even thank her. You said nobody cares about the cake anyway." "I didn't mean, Simone's voice was small. "Yes, you did. You meant exactly that." Jiho's gaze swept across the family, landing on each of them like a spotlight. "All of you have spent Hazel's entire life convincing her she was a burden, that she was too much, that she needed to be smaller and quieter and more convenient. And she believed you. She worked herself to exhaustion trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. She made herself smaller trying to fit into a family that never wanted her to fit." Richard Carter finally found his voice. "Now see here, you can't just—" "I can. And I will." Jiho's attention shifted to Hazel's father with lethal focus. "You stood by for 26 years while your wife emotionally abused your daughter. You said nothing when they excluded her tonight. You are complicit in every moment of pain they've caused her, and your silence makes you just as guilty." Maya stepped forward, voice sharp with defensive anger. "You're making a scene." "Good," Jiho said simply. "Your family's cruelty should be seen. It should be witnessed and documented and remembered, because maybe then Hazel will finally believe that none of this was her fault." He turned back to Diane. "She is under my protection now. All of you need to understand what that means. If any of you contact her to criticize, to manipulate, to ask for money or favors or emotional labor, if you so much as send a text message that makes her question her worth, you will answer to me, and I promise you that is not a fight you will win." The silence was absolute. Even the staff had stopped moving. Jiho gestured to his security team. "Collect all of Ms. Carter's belongings from the guest house, every item. Have it moved to my penthouse tonight." "You can't just—" Diane started. "I can. I am. And if you attempt to interfere, if you try to hold her belongings hostage or make this difficult in any way, you'll discover exactly how much influence I have in this city. I love her, And unlike everyone else in this family, that means she's the most important person to me, and I don't care how far I'd have to go to show her that. Jiho's voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. My family has been in New York for 3 generations. We own property in every borough. We have relationships with law firms, media outlets, and business leaders that you rely on for your social status. Test me and find out what happens when all of those relationships turn cold. He let that sink in, watched Diane's face pale as she realized this wasn't a bluff, then turned and walked back out to the parking lot where Hazel was still sitting on the bench, mascara streaked and beautiful, and finally believing that someone was on her side. Jiho extended his hand. "Let's go home." Hazel took it and stood, legs shaking, and let him guide her to the SUV. As they pulled away, she looked back once at the reception hall, at the family that had never been a family, and felt something shift in her chest. Not closure exactly, but the beginning of it. The first breath after nearly drowning. The penthouse was quiet and dark when they arrived, city lights twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows like stars. Hazel collapsed on the couch, still in that terrible lavender dress, and started crying. Really crying. The kind of sobbing that came from somewhere deep and broken that had been holding on too long. Jiho knelt in front of her again, this time just holding her hands and letting her break apart, because sometimes that was what love looked like. "I should have done that months ago," he said, when her crying finally slowed to hiccups. "They're my family," Hazel whispered. "They're people who share your blood. That's not the same thing. What if I regret this? You won't. But if you do, we'll handle it together. You're not alone anymore, Hazel. You're never going to be alone again. You said you love me in there?" Her voice was so small, like she was scared he was going to take it back. "Of course I love you, Hazel. I've loved you since that day at the restaurant, since I saw you put in all your efforts to make that cake for your sister's wedding, since I recognized how brave and beautiful and extraordinary you are." Their faces were close now, and they kissed. It was soft and understanding, and everything she deserved. She fell asleep there on the couch, exhausted in every possible way, and woke up the next morning in Jiho's room wearing soft pajamas that someone must have changed her into while she was unconscious with grief. She found Jiho in the dining room with coffee and a magazine, and he slid it across to her without a word. It was a culinary magazine. She was on the cover, photographed in Jiho's kitchen weeks ago without her knowing, holding a perfectly plated dessert, looking confident and beautiful and exactly like the chef she was. The headline read, "Rising Star, Hazel Carter's Journey to Redefining Pastry." "When did you—" she started. "I wanted you to see yourself the way I see you," Jiho said quietly, "not the way they told you to see yourself." Hazel's eyes filled with tears again, but different ones this time. Grateful ones. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, expression darkening slightly before he turned the screen to show her. Social media was exploding, videos of the confrontation, comments flooding in by the thousands. "That man is a king," one said. "Hazel deserves so much better," said another. "The Carter family should be ashamed." "My legal team blocked your mother, Maya, and Simone from contacting you directly," Jiho said. "Any communication has to go through my attorneys now. You don't have to respond to anything you don't want to." Days passed in a blur of rest and processing. Jiho's security prevented anyone from the family from showing up at Bellefleur. Hazel spent mornings sleeping late and afternoons in Jiho's kitchen, cooking not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And on the 4th day, Jiho took her hand and said, "Come with me." They walked through Koreatown, Hazel in comfortable clothes and hair down, no armor needed. The streets smelled like grilled meat and kimchi and all the foods she'd grown to love through Jiho. They stopped at a vendor selling hotteok, and Jiho bought 2, handing one to her with a smile that made her chest ache in the best way. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Hazel asked, taking a bite of the sweet, hot pastry. "I don't care if they do," Jiho said simply. "I used to think family was supposed to be home. Home isn't where you're from, it's where you're chosen." He looked at her then, really looked, with eyes that saw everything and loved all of it. "You chose me, I chose you, that's what matters. You really chose me." Her voice was small, still not quite believing it. "Every day. And I always will. You're my home, and I hope I am yours too." They kissed there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the chaos and beauty of the city, and Hazel felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Seen. Enough exactly as she was. For 26 years, she'd thought love was something you earned through sacrifice and self-erasure, through making yourself small enough to fit into spaces that were never designed for you. But Jiho had taught her something different. Love wasn't about shrinking. It was about being seen fully. The messy parts, the loud parts, the too much parts, and having someone say, "Yes, exactly this. You are perfect exactly like this." She didn't know if her family would ever apologize, didn't know if they'd ever see her the way Jiho did. But she finally understood that she didn't need their permission to take up space, didn't need their approval to be worthy of love. She was done apologizing for being too much, because to the right person, she was exactly enough. And standing there in Koreatown with Jiho's arms around her and the taste of sweet hodak on her lips, Hazel Carter finally understood what home felt like. It wasn't a building or a family name or a seat at a table that had never been set for her. Home was being chosen fully and completely by someone who would answer when she called, who would show up when she broke, who would fight for her when she couldn't fight for herself anymore. Home was Jiho. That was enough. She was enough, and for the first time in her entire life, she believed it. So before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you? Have you ever chosen yourself when it felt impossible? Drop your story in the comments because you're not alone in this. And if this story hit home for you, if you felt Hazel's pain or Jiho's fierce protection, share it with someone who needs to hear that they're worthy of better. Sometimes we all need the reminder that being too much for the wrong people just means we're exactly right for the right ones. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories like this coming. Stories about choosing yourself, about finding the people who see you, about learning that home is wherever you're loved completely. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are enough exactly as you are.